Choose me, cowboy. A lone cowboy in the moment that altered the Apache woman's fate. The sun hung low in the sky, turning the endless desert into a sea of gold and orange. The wind swept across the sand, carrying with it a dry heat that clung to every inch of the land. Layla, a young Apache woman, walked slowly, her bare feet leaving small imprints in the soft, hot sand. Her long dark hair was tied back with a strip of leather, but stray strands whipped across her face, stinging her eyes. She paused for a moment, letting the wind cool her for a second, and looked out over the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast, empty space that seemed to have no end, no walls and no mercy. Every step she took was deliberate, careful, because she knew that the desert could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. Layla's life had always been tied to the land, to the traditions of her people, to the stories her grandmother had told her when she was small. She had grown up learning how to read the signs of the desert, the tracks of animals, the subtle changes in the sand, the patterns of the clouds in the sky. But today she was walking alone, far from her home, far from anyone she could trust. The world beyond her village had changed, and danger seemed to follow her like a shadow. She clutched the small bag she carried, containing the few things she could not leave behind: dried meat, a water gourd, a knife, and a small piece of cloth her grandmother had sewn for her. Each item had a purpose, each was a piece of her survival. As she walked, she remembered the morning she had left her village. Her heart had been heavy with worry and fear. There had been signs that trouble was coming, signs that she could not ignore. Her people had warned her, whispered stories of strangers and soldiers, of cowboys and settlers who came with promises that were often broken. Layla knew she could not stay and wait for the danger to find her. She had to move, to find a place where she could breathe without fear, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. And so she had walked, leaving behind the familiar faces and the safety of her home, carrying only hope and determination. The desert was harsh. The sun blazed down with an almost painful intensity, and the sand reflected the light, making her eyes water. Every step required effort. Every movement was met with resistance from the dry, shifting ground. She kept her head down, moving steadily, measuring each step, thinking about her next move. She had learned to conserve her strength, to walk slowly and carefully, to rest when she could and keep going when she had to. She knew the desert was unforgiving, but she also knew it had its own kind of beauty. The way the light changed as the sun moved across the sky, the way the wind shifted the patterns in the sand, the silence that wrapped around everything, making her feel small and yet alive. Hours passed. Layla stopped by a small rock formation to rest, leaning against the warm stone and drinking a little water from her gourd. The water was cool against her dry throat, a small comfort in a harsh landscape. She closed her eyes for a moment and listened to the wind. The desert had sounds of its own, the whisper of the sand, the distant cry of a bird, the occasional rustle of something moving far away. Layla had learned to recognize these sounds, to understand what they meant. Silence could be dangerous, but it could also be a sign of safety. Today, the desert was mostly quiet, the kind of quiet that made her pulse quicken, her senses sharpen. As she rested, she thought about the stories her grandmother had told her as a child, stories of courage and survival, of people who had walked through deserts, through dangers, and come out stronger. Those stories had stayed with her, guiding her steps. She remembered her grandmother's words, "The land teaches us, Layla, it tests us, and when we listen it shows us the way." Layla had always believed this, but now, in the middle of the desert, alone and uncertain, the words felt heavier, more real. Every gust of wind, every shifting shadow seemed like a message she had to understand. She focused on her breathing, on her steps, on the small decisions she made, knowing that each one could make a difference. The sun began its slow descent, painting the desert in shades of red and purple. Layla's shadow stretched long across the sand, and she knew she needed to find shelter before nightfall. The desert could be cruel at night, with cold that seeped into the bones and darkness that swallowed everything. She scanned the horizon, looking for anything that could protect her, a cluster of rocks, a shallow canyon, anything that could give her a place to rest safely. Her eyes caught a small rise in the sand, a rocky outcrop that looked promising. She moved toward it, her body tired but her mind alert, calculating each step, prepared for anything. As she reached the rocks, she paused again, listening. The wind had shifted slightly, carrying a different sound, something faint, rhythmic, and steady. It was the sound of hooves on sand, a sound that made her heart skip a beat. She ducked behind the rocks, peering carefully over the edge. There in the distance was a lone figure on horseback, moving steadily across the dunes. Layla's first instinct was to hide, to watch, to make sure this stranger was not a threat. She had been warned about cowboys, about men who traveled these lands with little concern for anyone else, but something about the figure made her pause. The rider moved calmly, with purpose, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he handled the horse. It was unusual in this desert, where most travelers were hurried, nervous, or careless. The sun continued to sink lower, casting long shadows across the sand. Layla's curiosity grew, but so did her caution. She knew she could not stay here forever, but for a few moments she simply watched. The cowboy's horse moved with strength and ease, its hooves leaving clean prints in the sand. The man himself was tall and lean, dressed in simple clothes, with a hat that shaded his face. There was something about him that made Layla feel a strange mixture of caution and relief, as if, in this vast and lonely desert, she might have found another soul who understood the land, who respected its dangers, and who could move through it with care. The shadows grew deeper, and the temperature began to drop. Layla knew she could not remain exposed for long. She gathered her bag and prepared to move closer to the rocks that would give her better shelter for the night. Her mind raced with possibilities. Who was this cowboy? Was he alone? Could he be a friend, or would he bring trouble? Despite the questions, a small part of her felt hope. Perhaps she would not have to face the desert entirely alone. Perhaps, by some twist of fate, her journey might intersect with his in a way that could change everything. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and stepped carefully toward a small crevice in the rocks, ready to wait and see what the night might bring. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Layla settled behind the rocks, wrapping the piece of cloth her grandmother had sewn tightly around her shoulders. The desert was quiet now, except for the occasional whisper of wind. She thought about the day that had passed, the miles she had walked, the sun that had burned her skin, and the hope that had kept her moving. In the distance, the cowboy's figure became a dark silhouette against the horizon, moving steadily toward an unknown destination. Layla watched him, sensing that their meeting might not be accidental, that perhaps the desert had led them both to this moment for a reason she could not yet understand. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, listening to the wind, the sand, and the heartbeat of the desert, feeling both small and alive, ready for whatever the next day might bring. The desert night was colder than Layla expected. She shivered under the thin cloth wrapped around her shoulders, wishing she had more warmth. The stars stretched endlessly above, glittering like tiny fires, and the wind whispered secrets she could not quite understand. Her muscles ached from the long walk, and yet she could not sleep. Every sound made her heart beat faster, the soft rustle of sand, the distant cry of a coyote, the sighing wind across the rocks. She hugged her knees and tried to steady her breathing, telling herself that she had survived far worse. Still, the feeling of isolation weighed heavily on her. The sound of hooves returned, breaking the silence. This time it was closer, steadier, and accompanied by the rhythmic clinking of a bit against a horse's mouth. Layla's heart jumped. She had spent all day wary of strangers, knowing the dangers that travelers and cowboys could bring. She crouched lower behind the rocks, peering through a narrow opening. The moonlight cast silver over the sand and she saw him, Caleb, the lone cowboy she had noticed from afar earlier. He rode slowly, his eyes scanning the desert as if he could sense every movement of every creature. Layla felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. He was close, but he did not seem threatening. There was a calmness about him, a quiet strength that made her pulse slow despite the tension in her muscles. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew fiercely, whipping sand into her face. She coughed, blinking rapidly, and instinctively grabbed her small bag to shield herself. Caleb's head turned slightly toward her direction. For a moment he paused, his horse shifting uneasily. Layla froze, unsure whether he had noticed her, but after a few seconds he continued riding, moving steadily past her hiding place. Relief washed over her and she exhaled slowly. She realized that despite the desert's dangers, she was not entirely alone. Someone else moved through this vast land with careful attention, someone who respected its power. Hours passed as she waited, and finally, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. The sky changed from deep purple to soft pink, and the desert came alive with subtle movement. Layla decided she could no longer remain behind the rocks. She needed water, and she needed a path forward. Carefully, she adjusted her bag, making sure her supplies were secure, and stepped onto the sand. The desert was quiet except for the soft whisper of the wind and the distant sound of Caleb's horse moving further along the dunes. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the horizon, wondering if she should follow him or find her own way. Something inside her, a quiet voice of curiosity and hope, urged her to keep him in sight. She followed cautiously, staying behind a low rise in the sand to remain hidden. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, warming the desert and making the sand burn beneath her feet. Layla moved carefully, her senses alert. She noticed the small details, the tracks of animals, the shift of the sand under the wind, the way the rocks cast shadows that could provide brief shelter. Caleb remained ahead, seemingly unaware of her presence, but Layla felt that their meeting was coming closer with every step. There was something almost magical about the way he moved through the desert, as if he belonged to this harsh land as much as she did. Around midday, the sun was at its peak, and the heat became oppressive. Layla felt the sting of sweat dripping down her back, her throat dry despite the small sips of water she took from her gourd. She had been walking for hours, following a stranger she barely knew, and yet she felt a strange sense of purpose. The desert seemed endless, but she also felt that it was guiding her toward something important. In the distance, she saw Caleb pause beside a small rocky ridge. He dismounted and approached a shallow depression in the sand, carefully moving some stones to reveal a small cache of water he had hidden. He drank slowly, savoring every sip, and Layla watched from behind the rocks. She realized that he was careful, patient, and experienced. He understood the desert in a way that went beyond survival. Unable to resist her curiosity any longer, Layla decided to reveal herself. She stepped cautiously from behind the rocks, her hands raised slightly to show she meant no harm. Caleb's head turned sharply. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He studied her carefully, his eyes moving from her face to her worn clothes and back. Layla felt her heart race, her palms sweaty. I am not your enemy," she said softly, her voice trembling but firm. Caleb's gaze softened slightly and he nodded, motioning for her to approach. He did not speak yet, but the calm in his eyes reassured her that she could trust him for now. She moved closer, keeping her distance, and they finally exchanged words. Their conversation was cautious at first, simple questions about where she had come from and where she was going. Layla spoke honestly, telling him she had left her village to escape danger, to find safety, to survive. Caleb listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. Then he shared a little about himself, about traveling alone, about understanding the desert and respecting it. Layla noticed that he did not ask unnecessary questions, did not pry, but his presence felt protective, like a shield against the harshness around them. As they traveled together through the afternoon, they shared small supplies and took turns scouting the safest path. Caleb taught her a few tricks of desert travel, how to find water hidden beneath rocks, how to spot signs of animals or approaching storms, how to move quietly over shifting sand. Layla, in return, shared knowledge she had learned from her people, the patterns of the stars, the signs of subtle changes in the wind, the hidden trails animals used to avoid the sun. Slowly, a bond of trust formed between them, built not on words alone but on shared survival, on respect for the desert, and on an understanding that each step they took mattered. By evening, they reached a small canyon where the shadows provided shelter from the dying sun. Caleb started a small fire using dry twigs and stones, and Layla helped gather water and prepare a simple meal. The fire's warmth and light felt comforting after a long day of heat and uncertainty. They ate in silence at first, the crackling flames filling the air, then shared stories of their lives. Caleb spoke of wandering the frontier, of the loneliness that often came with traveling alone. Layla spoke of her family, of the people she had left behind, of the responsibilities she carried even as a young woman. With every word, the connection between them deepened, though neither of them fully realized how important this meeting would become. As night fell, the stars came out once again, brighter and more numerous than before. Layla looked up and felt a strange sense of peace. The desert, once a place of fear and isolation, now felt alive with possibility. Caleb glanced at her, sensing the change, and offered a quiet smile. It was a simple gesture, but it carried understanding, respect, and the beginning of friendship. For the first time in days, Layla felt that maybe she was not entirely alone. Maybe, just maybe, this stranger had arrived at the exact right moment to change the course of her journey. Before they slept, Caleb spoke quietly, his voice low but steady. "The desert tests everyone," he said. "It can break you or it can guide you. You've survived this far because you listened and paid attention. Keep doing that and it will show you the way." Layla nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She wrapped herself in her cloth and lay down beside the fire, listening to the wind and the soft breathing of her companion. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not filled entirely with fear, a future that included trust, hope, and perhaps even the faintest hint of companionship. The desert night stretched on, but Layla felt less alone than she had for a long time. She realized that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but with careful steps, trust, and a bit of courage, she could face it. Caleb, too, seemed aware of the significance of their meeting, though he did not speak of it. There was a quiet understanding between them, unspoken but undeniable. And as the fire burned low, casting gentle shadows over the sand and the rocks, both felt that the desert, vast and unforgiving, had brought them together for a reason, something neither of them fully understood yet, but something that might change both their lives forever. The sun rose slowly over the desert, casting a warm golden light that spread across the endless dunes. Layla stretched, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from the previous day's walk. Beside her, Caleb was already awake, carefully tending to the small fire that had burned low during the night. The flames flickered gently, and the soft crackling sound mingled with the quiet morning wind. Layla watched him for a moment, noticing how methodical and careful he was. He had a calmness about him that made the desert feel a little less harsh, a little more manageable. For the first time, she felt that she was not entirely alone in this vast, lonely land. After a simple breakfast of dried meat and bread, they prepared to continue their journey. Layla's feet were sore and her body ached, but her spirit felt lighter. The bond that had begun to form yesterday now carried more weight. She trusted Caleb in a way she had never trusted a stranger before, and she could see that he trusted her as well. They moved side by side, scanning the horizon and stepping carefully over the shifting sand. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. Layla had learned to pay attention to the smallest details, the tracks of animals, the shadow of rocks, the subtle changes in the wind. Caleb had taught her how to conserve energy, how to read the signs of the desert, and how to stay calm even when danger seemed near. As the morning turned to afternoon, they reached a small canyon, shaded by rocky cliffs that offered relief from the blazing sun. They rested for a while, drinking water from their gourds and sharing a quiet meal. Layla looked around, taking in the beauty of the desert she had once feared. The colors of the rocks, the patterns in the sand, and the way the light shifted across the landscape reminded her of the stories her grandmother had told her. The desert was harsh, yes, but it was also full of life and wonder for those who knew how to see it. Caleb noticed her quiet gaze and offered a small smile. "It's easy to forget that the desert can be beautiful," he said. "Most people only see the danger, not the life hidden in it." They continued walking, and as the day grew hotter, Layla realized how much she had learned from Caleb. He moved with ease over the dunes, guiding her over the safest paths, showing her where to find small pools of water or edible plants. He spoke little, but each word was careful and thoughtful. Layla shared her own knowledge in return, pointing out animal tracks and subtle signs in the wind that Caleb had not noticed. Together, they formed a rhythm, a silent understanding that allowed them to navigate the desert more efficiently. The more they traveled together, the more Layla felt a sense of connection. She had never imagined that she could trust a stranger so quickly, yet here she was, walking beside him as if they had known each other for years. Late in the afternoon, a sudden gust of wind blew across the dunes, carrying with it a cloud of sand that stung Layla's eyes. She stumbled, her vision blurred, and Caleb's hand shot out to steady her. "Careful," he said gently, his voice calm but firm. She nodded, gripping his arm as they moved toward a small cluster of rocks that offered shelter from the wind. Once they were safe, Layla took a deep breath and wiped the sand from her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. Caleb nodded, saying nothing, but she could feel the sincerity in his gesture. It was a simple act, but in the desert, such gestures carried immense weight. As they rested, Layla began to open up more about her life. She told Caleb about her family, about the people she had left behind, and about the responsibilities she carried as a young Apache woman. She spoke of her fears and her dreams, of the hope that had kept her moving despite the hardships she faced. Caleb listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, offering small words of encouragement when needed. He shared stories of his own life as a traveler, of the loneliness that often accompanied him, and of the lessons he had learned while moving through the wilderness. They laughed softly at times, sharing small moments of joy, and Layla felt a warmth in her chest she had not experienced in a long time. As evening approached, the desert transformed once again. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the shadows stretched long across the sand. Layla and Caleb set up a small camp behind a rocky ridge, gathering wood for a fire and preparing a simple meal. The fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows across the rocks. They sat together, sharing the food and enjoying the rare comfort of warmth and light in the vast desert. The air cooled as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge, filling the sky with countless points of light. Layla looked up, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. She realized that the desert, once a place of fear and isolation, now felt alive with possibility. That night, as they lay beside the fire, Caleb spoke softly. "You've come a long way," he said. "Not just in distance, but in strength. You've faced the desert and you've learned from it. You're stronger than you realize." Layla nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She thought about the journey ahead, about the challenges she would face, and about the choices she would need to make. For the first time, she felt that she was not alone in facing them. Caleb's presence offered a sense of security, but it was more than that. It was the feeling that someone understood her, respected her, and could walk beside her through the unknown. The following days passed in a rhythm of travel, rest, and careful observation. Layla and Caleb navigated the desert together, learning from each other and growing closer through shared experiences. They faced small challenges: a sudden rainstorm that turned the sand into sticky mud, a rocky path that threatened to trip them, a herd of wild animals that passed nearby. But each obstacle strengthened their bond. Layla discovered that she could rely on Caleb not only for survival but also for companionship, for the reassurance that she was not entirely alone in the world. And Caleb, in turn, found that he enjoyed her presence, her insight, and her courage. One afternoon, as they rested in the shade of a large boulder, Caleb noticed the worry in Layla's eyes. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. Layla hesitated, then spoke of the uncertainty she felt about the future, about leaving her village, and about the life she was trying to build. Caleb listened carefully, then offered his perspective. "The future is always uncertain," he said. "But the choices you make now can shape it. You've already proven you can survive, and that's the hardest part. The rest will follow." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that Layla felt deep in her heart. She realized that she was learning not just to survive the desert, but to navigate the choices that would shape her life. As night fell once more, they prepared to sleep beside the fire. Layla felt a sense of gratitude and relief that she had not felt in a long time. The desert, once a place of danger and isolation, had become a place of connection, learning, and hope. She knew the journey ahead would still be difficult, but with Caleb beside her, she felt stronger, braver, and more prepared for whatever lay ahead. As the fire burned low and the stars shone brightly above, she closed her eyes, listening to the wind and the subtle sounds of the desert. She felt a quiet confidence, a sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, at least for this moment. The next morning, Layla awoke to the soft golden light of dawn and the quiet presence of Caleb. They prepared to move once again, their steps synchronized as they navigated the dunes. Each day, each step, each small challenge brought them closer together. Layla's trust in Caleb deepened, and she felt a connection that went beyond words. She began to understand that the desert had brought them together not by chance, but for a reason. The lessons she had learned from her people, combined with the guidance and experience of Caleb, were shaping her into someone capable of facing the unknown with courage and determination. By the time the sun reached its highest point, they had traveled several miles, and Layla felt a sense of accomplishment and pride. The desert no longer seemed endless and unyielding. It was a landscape of challenges and rewards, of lessons and discoveries. She had learned to read its signs, to move with patience and care, and to trust both her instincts and the companionship of someone who respected her journey. The bond between her and Caleb had grown stronger with each passing day, built on trust, shared survival, and a quiet understanding that neither of them needed to rush. As they made camp that evening, Layla reflected on the transformation that had occurred since the day she first encountered Caleb. The desert, which had once been a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a place of learning, growth, and connection. She realized that the experiences of the past days had changed her, not only in terms of survival skills, but also in her perspective on trust, companionship, and the possibilities of life beyond her village. For the first time, she felt a sense of hope that was not tied to fear or uncertainty, but to the knowledge that she had the strength, wisdom, and support to face the future. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow across the desert dunes. Layla and Caleb had traveled for days, moving steadily but cautiously, learning to read the subtle signs of the land. The wind shifted constantly, carrying with it the dry, hot scent of sand and the faint aroma of distant plants. Layla's muscles ached, and her feet were sore, but her spirit was stronger than ever. She had learned to trust her instincts, to move carefully, and to rely on Caleb's knowledge and companionship. Yet, despite the growing trust between them, she felt a growing tension in her heart, a sense that the journey was reaching a turning point. As they approached a small settlement on the edge of the desert, Layla's pace slowed. The sight of buildings, fences, and people moving about was both comforting and intimidating. She had left her village to escape danger, to find safety, and to create a future for herself. But now, standing on the edge of a new community, she realized that she faced a difficult choice. This was the first place she had seen in weeks where she might be able to rest, find work, and rebuild a life. But it also represented the unknown, the uncertainty of how she would be received, what her future would hold, and whether she could truly belong. Caleb noticed her hesitation. He guided his horse beside hers and spoke softly, his voice steady and calm. "We're close now," he said. "Soon you'll have to decide where you want to go from here. The path you choose will shape the next part of your life." Layla looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and hope. She trusted Caleb, and his presence had given her courage, but the choice ahead was hers alone. The words he had spoken carried weight, yet they did not tell her what to do. She realized that no one could make this decision for her. As they continued toward the settlement, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of red, orange, and purple. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and the desert seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Layla's mind was full of questions. Should she continue traveling with Caleb, someone she barely knew but trusted deeply? Or should she step into the settlement, alone, and face whatever life had in store there? The thought of venturing into the unknown without him was terrifying, yet the idea of staying beside Caleb without carving her own path also felt limiting. Her heart raced and she felt the weight of every step. Caleb sensed her struggle. He slowed his horse and looked at her with gentle eyes. "You don't have to answer now," he said. "The choice is yours and it has to be yours. But whatever you decide, make it from your heart, not your fear." Layla nodded, taking a deep breath. She had spent her entire journey learning to survive, to trust, and to persevere. Now she had to use those same skills to make a decision about her future. She realized that fear had guided many of her past actions, but this time she needed courage, hope, and honesty with herself. As they approached the outskirts of the settlement, the first signs of life became clear. A small group of people moved along a dusty road, a child laughed, a horse trotted past, and a vendor called out the prices of goods. Layla felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The settlement represented opportunity, a chance to rest, to rebuild, to meet others, but it also represented uncertainty. She did not know how she would be received, whether she would find acceptance, or if her skills and experience would be valued. Caleb rode beside her, offering silent support, but he did not push her, understanding that the choice was hers alone. They found a quiet place to rest behind a large rock near the edge of the settlement. The sun was low now, casting long shadows and turning the sky into a canvas of fiery colors. Layla sat on the sand, hugging her knees, and considered her options. Caleb gave her space, watching quietly, his presence a reassuring constant. She thought of the days she had traveled alone, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned from the desert. She realized that she had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. She had survived, learned to trust, and discovered a connection with someone who respected her and her journey. Her thoughts drifted to Caleb. He had appeared in her life at a moment when she needed guidance, protection, and understanding. His knowledge of the desert had kept her safe, his calmness had eased her fears, and his presence had brought a sense of companionship she had never expected to find. She felt a deep gratitude and a subtle warmth in her heart. Yet she knew that following him without considering her own needs and desires would not be fair to herself. She needed to make a choice that reflected her hopes, her courage, and her vision for the future. The desert wind whispered through the rocks, and Layla closed her eyes, listening to its soft rhythm. She thought about the life she wanted, not just survival but happiness, purpose, and the chance to grow. Caleb had helped her survive, but he could not decide her future. She realized that she had to trust herself, to listen to her own heart, and to make a choice that honored her journey, her strengths, and her dreams. The decision felt heavy, yet empowering. For the first time, she understood that her life was hers to shape, and that courage meant stepping into the unknown with hope rather than fear. Caleb noticed the shift in her expression. "Whatever you choose," he said softly, "I will respect it. The desert brought us together for a reason, but your path is yours to follow." Layla opened her eyes and looked at him, feeling the weight of the moment. The desert, vast and endless, had tested her, taught her, and guided her to this point. Now she realized that the true challenge was not the land around her, but the decision she carried in her heart. She had to choose a path that would lead her to growth, safety, and perhaps even happiness. As the sun set completely, casting the sky in deep shades of purple and blue, Layla made her decision. She would not let fear dictate her life. She would step forward, choosing the path that allowed her to embrace trust, hope, and the possibility of companionship. With a deep breath, she turned to Caleb, her eyes steady and bright. "I choose to move forward with you," she said softly, her voice full of conviction. Caleb studied her face for a moment, then offered a gentle smile, a mix of relief and quiet joy. He extended his hand, and Layla took it, feeling a sense of courage and certainty she had not felt before. Together, they rode toward the settlement, the desert stretching behind them, no longer confining them but guiding them. The wind brushed against their faces, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. Layla felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, knowing that the road ahead would still hold challenges, but confident that she was not facing them alone. She had made her choice, not out of fear or uncertainty, but out of trust, hope, and the knowledge that she could shape her own future. As the first lights of the settlement glimmered in the distance, Layla felt a sense of peace she had not known in weeks. She had survived the desert, learned from it, and discovered the strength within herself to make a life-changing decision. Caleb's presence was a gift, but the courage had come from her. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and loneliness, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The desert, once a place of challenge and isolation, had become a place of transformation, preparing her for the next chapter of her life. The settlement grew closer, and the sounds of life became clearer, the laughter of children, the voices of traders, the clip-clop of horses. Layla's heart raced with anticipation and hope. She realized that every step, every choice, and every lesson had led her to this moment. The desert had tested her endurance, resilience, and trust, and she had risen to the challenge. Now, she was ready to step into a future shaped by her courage, her decisions, and her willingness to embrace both uncertainty and opportunity. Caleb rode beside her, offering silent support, and Layla felt a profound gratitude. She had chosen to trust, to hope, and to move forward, and in doing so, she had altered the course of her life forever. The desert behind them no longer felt like a barrier, but a testament to her strength and determination. As they rode together toward the settlement, Layla realized that the journey was far from over, but for the first time she felt ready, not just to survive but to live, to grow, and to embrace whatever life had in store. The morning sun broke over the horizon, painting the desert in soft shades of gold and pink. Layla adjusted her saddle, feeling the warm leather beneath her hands and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her. Beside her, Caleb rode silently, a calm presence that had become both reassuring and comforting over the past days. The decision she had made the previous evening still echoed in her mind, choosing to trust him, to take a path forward together. It was a choice that carried courage, hope, and the recognition that life's journey was not meant to be faced alone. As they approached the edge of the settlement, the first signs of life grew clearer. Small houses, fenced yards, and the bustling movement of people filled the horizon. Layla felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The desert behind her had been harsh, isolating, and demanding, but it had also shaped her in ways she could not yet fully understand. It had taught her patience, endurance, and the value of trust. She had discovered strength she did not know she possessed, and she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Caleb guided her toward the main road of the settlement, a path lined with small wooden buildings, a well in the center, and townspeople going about their morning chores. The air smelled of fresh bread, wood smoke, and the faint scent of animals. Layla's heart raced as she took in the sights and sounds. She had left her village seeking safety and a new beginning, and now she faced the reality of stepping into a community she had never known. Yet with Caleb beside her, she felt a sense of strength she had never experienced before. She had chosen this path, and she would face it with courage. They dismounted near a shaded area and led their horses to water. Layla noticed children running and laughing, vendors calling out their wares, and people greeting one another with friendly nods. It was a scene full of life, energy, and possibility. She realized that this place, with all its unfamiliarity, offered her the chance to belong, to contribute, and to build something meaningful. The desert had prepared her for this moment, teaching her resilience and patience, and now it was time to embrace the opportunities before her. Caleb walked beside her, speaking in quiet, encouraging tones. "Take your time," he said. "No one is rushing you. You decide how you want to move forward." Layla nodded, grateful for his presence, but also aware that she had to take the next steps on her own. She wanted to explore the settlement, to understand the people, and to find a place where she could begin to rebuild her life. Yet she also felt comfort in knowing that Caleb would be there, not as a guide who made choices for her, but as a companion who respected her autonomy and her strength. As they walked, Layla noticed a small community gathering near a shaded area, a group of people sharing food, stories, and laughter. She hesitated at first, unsure whether to approach. The fear of the unknown pressed against her chest, but she reminded herself of the lessons the desert had taught her. She had survived harsh conditions, navigated danger, and made a pivotal choice the night before. Now she could apply that same courage to enter this community and discover her place within it. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her posture steady and her head held high. A few townspeople noticed her and offered friendly greetings. Layla responded with a small nod and a soft smile, feeling a sense of warmth she had not experienced in a long time. She realized that trust and openness, the qualities she had cultivated on her journey, could extend beyond her relationship with Caleb to interactions with others. Each step she took into the settlement felt like a small victory, a demonstration of her courage and her willingness to embrace the unknown. Caleb walked beside her, silently supporting her, and she felt a quiet reassurance in his presence. As they continued, Layla spotted a small bakery with the smell of fresh bread drifting into the street. She paused, considering the possibilities, a chance to learn a skill, to contribute, and to begin building a life of her own. Caleb gave her an encouraging nod. "Go on," he said. "It's a good place to start." Layla entered the bakery, greeted by a kind woman behind the counter who welcomed her warmly. They spoke briefly, exchanging introductions and smiles, and Layla felt the first spark of hope for her future. She realized that each small interaction, each choice to engage with the people around her, could shape the path she was building. Outside the bakery, Caleb waited patiently. Layla joined him after a few moments, her eyes bright with anticipation. "It feels possible," she said softly. Caleb smiled. "It does," he replied. "You've earned this chance. The desert brought you here, and now it's your turn to decide how to use it." Layla nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the desert, for her survival, and for the companion who had walked beside her through the challenges. She knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she had the strength and determination to face whatever lay ahead. As the day progressed, Layla and Caleb explored the settlement together. They met townspeople, shared stories, and began to understand the rhythms of life in this new place. Layla felt a growing sense of belonging, the kind that comes from trust, courage, and the willingness to engage with the world. She realized that the lessons she had learned in the desert, patience, observation, resilience, and trust, were now guiding her in this new chapter of life. Caleb's presence was a comfort, but it was her own choices and courage that had brought her to this moment. In the afternoon, they found a quiet spot on a small hill overlooking the settlement. The sun cast long shadows across the landscape, and the wind carried the gentle scents of flowers and fresh bread. Layla sat down, taking in the view, and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the desert, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned. She realized that her life had been shaped by her courage, her ability to trust, and the pivotal choice she had made to move forward with Caleb. Each step, each decision, and each moment of trust had led her to this point, and she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and hope. Caleb sat beside her, watching her quietly. "You've changed," he said softly. "You've grown stronger, braver, and wiser. The desert taught you well." Layla smiled, feeling the truth in his words. She had indeed changed, not just in terms of survival skills, but in her confidence, her understanding of trust, and her ability to make choices that shaped her future. She realized that the journey had been about more than just reaching the settlement. It had been about discovering herself, her strength, and her capacity to embrace life fully. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and purple, Layla felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that challenges would continue, that life in the settlement would require effort, learning, and adaptation. Yet she also knew that she had the tools, the courage, and the support to face them. Caleb remained by her side, not as someone who dictated her path, but as a companion who shared the journey, offering guidance when needed and support without control. Layla realized that this was the essence of trust, partnership, and connection, a balance of independence and companionship. That evening, as they prepared to rest under the stars once more, Layla felt gratitude for every step of the journey. The desert had tested her endurance, resilience, and courage. It had taught her to trust herself and others, to observe carefully, and to face fear with determination. Caleb's presence had offered companionship, safety, and understanding, but it was her own choices that had shaped the path she now walked. She felt a sense of hope that extended beyond survival, a hope that included growth, learning, and the possibility of joy and fulfillment. Under the night sky, with stars stretching endlessly above, Layla whispered softly to herself, "I am ready." She realized that readiness was not about knowing every outcome, but about having the courage, trust, and determination to face whatever came next. The desert had brought her to this moment, and her choice to embrace trust and hope had opened a door to a future full of possibilities. Caleb rested beside her, and she felt a quiet sense of companionship that went beyond words. Together they had navigated the challenges of the desert, and now they would face the future, side by side, with courage and confidence. As the night deepened, Layla closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire, the presence of Caleb, and the vast possibilities of the life ahead. She knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she had already accomplished something extraordinary. She had survived, grown, and made a choice that would shape her life forever. The desert had been harsh, the path uncertain, and the future unknown, yet she felt ready to embrace it all. She had chosen hope, trust, and courage, and that choice had changed everything. In the days that followed, Layla began to build her new life in the settlement. She learned new skills, formed friendships, and discovered ways to contribute to the community. Caleb remained a steady presence, sometimes guiding, sometimes silent, always respectful of her independence. Layla felt a profound sense of satisfaction and growth, knowing that she had faced the challenges of the desert, made difficult decisions, and emerged stronger and wiser. She realized that life was a series of choices, and that courage and trust could transform even the most uncertain path into one filled with hope and possibility. The desert, once a place of isolation and danger, had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and guidance. Layla carried its lessons with her, using them to navigate her new life, build meaningful relationships, and embrace the opportunities before her. She had discovered that survival was only the beginning. The true journey lay in living fully, trusting wisely, and making choices that honored both her past and her future. And as she looked at the stars stretching across the night sky, she knew that she had done exactly that.